And then we got to the point where you could do a call-in. And one day, my mother was listening to the radio, and there was this really great debate going on. And in our home, we had two phones. We had one in the kitchen, so that you could tell, my father could tell my mother to get off the phone when she called long distance. We could see the minute hand, and many of you remember those days. And we had a phone in my parents' bedroom, which was an extravagance because I really never understood why it was there. So my mother went around the house. She was so excited about this debate. And she looked in all the rooms and couldn't find me. And the last room that she would have ever gone into would have been her bedroom. And she came through the door, and I was the one on the phone in the middle of the debate with the commentator on the radio. And my mother said, "Good job, Johnny, keep going." When I was a kid, we used to go up to the schoolyard, and that's where I played baseball and basketball, and we'd fight with one another and argue, and it was the best. And there was a time that came where these two boys brought these ponies up to the schoolyard, and it cost probably 10 cents for a pony ride. Those were the days when a hamburger at McDonald's was 15 cents and French fries, I think, were 12. And so it was a dime, and I went up a couple times and rode on these ponies. And one day my mother wanted to know what the heck was going on, so she went up to the schoolyard with me. And I took the pony ride, and I don't remember if my mother gave 50 cents or $1, but we walked down that hill together, and I said, "Mom, the pony ride was 10 cents, and you gave this extra money." She said, "Johnny, did you see his eye? It was out of place. Did you see the clothes he wore? They were ragged, Johnny. We may not have a lot, but when we have something, we give it to people who don't have as much as we have." That's 50 years ago, folks. Thanks, Mom. My father's father was a coal miner. He also immigrated. He worked in this coal mine, and he'd go 5 stories underground. And he'd get on his hands and knees, and he'd dig the coal and put it in 4 or 5 carts. And the carts would go to the surface. And Sheldon, my grandfather, would think he did a great job, but they'd say, "There's not enough coal in those carts. You got too much coke in there, and that's not valuable to us." And it hurt him a lot. He had cataracts on his eyes, but he couldn't get an operation because he'd lose his job in the mine. He'd go to work, and he'd take his lunch. He would eat about half of it, according to my Uncle George, and he would come home and share the rest of that lunch with the kids. And Uncle George says he still remembers the smell of that lunch because it smelled like that coal mine, but they had to eat. And Uncle George had 4 brothers, my father, about hopes and dreams, but he gave me one really important lesson. When I was a kid, in those days, you tried out for the Little League baseball team, and that was my big deal. I wanted to play Little League baseball. And you put a number on your back, and you ran out into the field, and they would look at you and figure out, are you good enough? Now, I was a little kid. I was a little boy. I was thin and, small, and I ran out there every year for 2 or 3 years, and they write your number down. They'd call you at home. No one ever called me. No one ever called me. And then I found out a really couple great lessons. One is the kids that I was playing ball with, who I think I was actually better than, were all on the teams. And then I found out their fathers were the assistant coach. So I learned a good lesson about it's not what you know, it's who you know. So I said to my father, Daddy, could you call somebody up and get me on the Little League baseball team? My dad said, no, Johnny. You have to earn it. We will never owe anybody anything. We will make it on our own. Because when you make it on your own, you're not under the control of anybody else, Johnny. My parents taught me about common sense. They taught me about faith in God. They taught me about the need that when you have your hands on the wheel, drive the car. Don't pull it to the side of the road. I was a state senator, I was a congressman for 18 years, and then I was out for 10 in business, which was a great, great, great 10 years. And then I ran for governor for this basic reason. I felt, frankly, that the Lord had blessed me, coming from McKees Rocks and looking at the background, and I felt, look, I got something to give. The greatest Jewish tradition is that, and Bruce mentioned it, is that you are not here just to take care of yourself. This is why that book was so great, the story of how the Jews saved civilization. It's what we can never lose in the Jewish community, the sense of purpose, the sense of community, and the sense of something that's bigger. So I ran for this job and got elected. And I did face the highest deficit that the state had ever seen, $8 billion in the hole, and everybody said you're going to have to raise taxes. But, you know, when I came in, I looked at our problem in Ohio like, say Sheldon and I owned a restaurant together. This would be an impossibility, but let's just say that he and I owned a restaurant together and we had no customers. So I call him up, I say, hey Sheldon, I got the answer to having no customers. Let's raise our prices. That'll bring them in. So we couldn't raise our prices in Ohio. In fact, we had to cut our prices, and we probably had to change the menu. And so coming into that job and looking at this $8 billion hole, see, government's not complicated. People try to make it complicated. Ari and I worked many years together. It's pretty darn simple, isn't it, Ari? You think of it as you think of a family. You know, if you're short money, okay, what is it that I don't need? What is it that I need? And what is it that I'll have to struggle through, and then maybe I can get it later? So we looked at the entire budget, and I have to tell you, nobody, but nobody, back to Dad, had an angle on me or an angle on my team. And let me say that without a team, you're dead. It's all about who's around you. But we all had the attitude that we're going to seize the high moral ground. We're not going to do any favors for anybody. They give money, or if we know them, it doesn't matter. Because once you lose the high moral ground, you can't execute the reforms that you need to do. So we went through that, and at the same time we were managing the expenditures, we cut taxes. And by the way, we killed the death tax. Now, the thing that's so great about killing the death tax is no next heir should have to sell a business to pay taxes to the government after that person, you know, paid taxes to the government all of their lives. So we decided to kill it, and we did, okay? And we cut our income tax, and so moving forward with the idea of cutting taxes and balancing the budget, exactly what we did in 1997, we went from that $8 billion hole. A short 3 years later, we now run a $1.5 billion surplus. So that's a change of $9.5 billion. Now, also when I came in, Ohio truly was a flyover state. I mean, nobody had any time for Ohio, didn't even think about Ohio. And so we had lost 350,000 private sector jobs. And when I think about work, I think about dignity. And when I think about work, I think about personal responsibility. And when I think about work, I think about a strengthened community. And when somebody has to go home at night and sit around the dinner table and tell their spouse and their children, today I lost my job, that is a dagger to the heart. And when they can go home and say, today I got a job, think about what that brings into a family. That's why I say job creation is our greatest moral purpose, because it changes human beings. So what happens? We're down 350,000 jobs, and with the process of bringing in common sense regulations, reducing the cost of government, balancing a budget, providing a surplus, and providing stability, I can tell you today that in Ohio, we've gone from the 350,000 lost private sector jobs to almost 250,000 new jobs and Ohioans working today as a result of these policies that we all believe in. So, folks, you know what's interesting is all these things that we believe in, they work. And the thing about the states are they're the laboratories to see if they work. So it's not that complicated. I was a big Reagan fan, okay? It's real simple. You know, you balance budgets, you cut taxes, you may have common sense regulations, and things will grow, and they are growing. Now, getting done with the economy, there's other things, of course, you have to focus on, and we focus, as every politician talks about, on education. But you know, education is not like, first of all, we put a lot more money in it, and that's okay. But we hold the people accountable where we've put the money. Here's our challenge today. Our challenge today is to have an education system that, number one, feeds the kids' passions and their God-given talents for why they're on the earth. Number two, that we get them excited about learning because they can see a roadmap to what it is that they want to do in their lives. And number three, we've got to give them the information to know what it is that they can do, what it costs, what it pays, how you get there, and what the roadmap is, which we are developing today. We also know that kids learn differently. We have 24,000 students who drop out a year, 24,000 without a high school diploma, and 1 million Ohioans who don't have a diploma. Well, we're on it. We're bringing in significant innovation in our education system to feed those potential dropouts. We're bringing vocational education into the 7th grade so that kids can begin to learn skills and to learn purpose. And when they have it, they're more likely to go to a 2-year school or a 4-year school than anybody else that's in that school universe. It is incredible how it can work. We also believe very significantly in mentoring. Now, I was down at this place called the Cincinnati Collaborative. They have a graduation rate in the Cincinnati schools of about 65%. Well, they have this one program in this school that I just visited, and what it does is they take business people. We'll put somebody in this school to do mentoring. Here's an amazing statistic. If you show up 1 hour a week for a year, that's not 30 minutes for 6 months. It's not 1 hour a week for 9 months. It's 1 hour a week for a year. You will change a life. The graduation rate is 96%. And these kids are motivated. Now, what I believe is this. We have to take our communities back, ladies and gentlemen. We need business leaders, and community and faith-based organizations, and students, and the willing people who are the educators, and finding out who the guardians are, and get them in a place, and they just don't have to be poor. They can be all kids, where we sit down and we talk about their worth, we talk about their purpose, we talk about the fact that they can be something someday. We need to take our country back, and we can't rely on the government to do all of this. It takes us, and we want to grow this in every community in the state of Ohio, and we think that it can be a great change in the way that we do things. Education, of course, job training. We spend so much of our time on job training, and we're actually hooking people now with jobs that exist, and by the way, we have a program for veterans. You know, what we've said is if you can drive a truck from Kabul to Kandahar, Afghanistan, you ought to be able to drive one from Cleveland to Columbus without having to go get a CDL. We're going to give you credit for all the experience that you have in the military, okay? Now, folks, let me also tell you that the economic side is critical. What you do with higher ed, how you train people, how you educate them in the early years, early childhood education, anywhere from K through 12, in the 2-year schools, in the 4-year schools, it's critical. That's how you drive an economy. But let me also tell you that while you are making your economy stronger, it is no different than a mom and dad who become stronger financially. The stronger that mom and dad are, the more they can help their kids. The stronger our state is, the more we can do to help people who live in the shadows. Now, I reclaimed $14 billion of Ohioans' money that was located in Washington, okay? That money I wanted back in Ohio. Some governors have decided to leave it in Washington. I might have thought about leaving it there, but I happen to know what they do with it down there, okay? So I am bringing it home to Ohio. And let me tell you what we're doing with it. Number one, this country has a crisis that is related to drug addiction. You know, when we were younger in our lives, this problem of drug addiction was located in areas that were largely in our inner cities. And frankly, I don't know how they battled this terrible problem when everybody else ignored their problem. What's happened now is this problem of drug addiction is in every neighborhood. Well, it's in Chicago, it's in Beverly Hills, it's in Cleveland, it's everywhere. And what's happened is people in the 90s, doctors started prescribing drugs, and Sheldon's someone that knows about this, in order to deal with the problem of pain management. But there was a flood of prescription drugs that came into our society and in our culture, into our country. And so you have grandma and aunts and uncles that have these pills sitting in their medicine cabinets, and now young people go to school parties in the 11th and 12th grade, and there's a bowl of pills that sit in the room, and their friends say, hey, let's take one. And then they get hooked on the prescription drugs, on the OxyContin. And then as you shut down pill mills and as you make it harder for people to get the prescription drugs, they move to heroin. And it's everywhere. And you talk to your sons and your daughters and your grandchildren, and you will find it's a major crisis. In our state, we took it on. We've taken licenses from doctors who have been irresponsible. We have shut down pill mills where they were passing out these prescription pills in a drive-by like you were going to McDonald's. We have our highway patrol and our local law enforcement busting the drug pushers. But it is not enough to just deal with the supply. We are now beginning to deal with the demand and building a program in all of our schools and all of our communities now to give kids the confidence to be able to say no. We have some parents that travel as part of this program. My kids go to Christian schools. It's a conservative place, Sheldon. It's like when we went to school. We don't write on the walls or talk back to the teachers. The last place you'd think there'd be drugs. Well, one of the fathers had a son. He got into the drugs. And one night, there was a knock at his door and a police officer who said to him, "Sir, I'm sorry to inform you that your son has died of a drug overdose and we've just found him in his car." A lady's been on the road with us. Her son took one prescription drug, one OxyContin. They took him to the emergency room. He went home, went to bed, never woke up the next day. It's the other young man that I know. He's now in Alaska. He went to Ohio State, started playing with drugs. They got into prescription drugs. He had a fist fight with his roommate over the last snort of OxyContin. He is a heroin addict recovering today. His mom and dad walk on eggshells because will their son make it out? And it's no different, folks, than having an alligator in your living room. It will chase you around and you must feed it, and if you don't feed it, it will kill you. We brought our money back now, and we are beginning to rehab the people so they can get their lives back. And I think turning our back on them it's just flat out wrong. And many of these people who are hooked on drugs are in our jails and in our prisons. And this is not just an Ohio problem. This is a problem across this country. And now we are wading into this battle, and it will be a major victory for our culture as we wage this battle and begin to win. Mental illness. Brad Caston's wife runs a mental illness program at Ohio State University. How would you like to have your daughter come home from college, or your granddaughter? She gives you a big hug and then disappears upstairs for a couple hours. and you find out she's bipolar. Get ready. We in this country promised the mentally ill that when we shut down the big institutions, we would help them in their communities. We've not kept our word. But by bringing our money back from Washington to our state and putting it into our local communities, we can begin to help people who have this tremendous problem of mental illness. And we also want to help the working poor. And we also want to create a welfare system that provides the incentives for people to get pay raises and job promotions without losing benefits. You see, the fact of the matter is, we've created a system where if they get a promotion or if they get a bonus, they begin to lose child care or food stamps. A single mom with 2 or 3 kids, she's a pretty smart lady. And we now have to have a welfare system that gives her the incentive to make progress, to get out of the rut and be able to have the same kind of life that we have. And let me just tell you, folks, let me tell you something. At the end of the day, we need to strengthen that economy, because without that, you have nothing. But once it's getting stronger, we have an obligation as human beings to reach out to those that live in those shadows. And in the fine Jewish tradition and the Christian tradition, whether it's that old book or that new book, and you put them both together, helping those that can't help themselves is part of our purpose as human beings.